Imagine standing on the cobblestone streets of Boston in 1770. The air smells of smoke and tension. British soldiers line the streets, muskets glinting under the lantern light. The crowd grows restless. Angry words fly, stones are thrown, and suddenly, gunfire. The Boston Massacre. 5 colonists lie dead. The crowd screams for vengeance. And then, amidst the chaos, one man steps forward. Not to condemn the soldiers, but to defend them. That man was John Adams, future President of the United States, founding father, and one of the most complex figures in American history. This is not the story of a man chasing fame or power. It's the story of a man who loved the law, who believed in reason when passion ruled the streets, and who helped build the nation, even when he didn't quite fit into it. John Adams was born on October 30th, 1735, in a small farmhouse in Braintree, Massachusetts. The world he entered was quiet, rural, a life of farmers, ministers, and community gossip around wooden tables. His father, a deacon and farmer, hoped John might become a minister, but John had other plans. As a boy, he was restless, sharp, proud, and a little stubborn. "I must study politics and war," he would later write, "that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy." Even at a young age, Adams was thinking about the generations ahead. He went on to study at Harvard, where he began to find his true calling, not in theology, but in law. He once said that the law was an empire of reason, and he wanted to serve it. By his 30s, Adams had built a reputation as one of Boston's most honest and fiery lawyers. And then came that fateful night in March 1770, the Boston Massacre. When the British soldiers were charged with murder, no one dared defend them. The city's anger was white-hot. To take the case would be social suicide. But Adams believed in something higher than public opinion. He believed in justice. He argued in that crowded courtroom that facts are stubborn things. And with his careful reasoning, he convinced the jury that the soldiers had acted in self-defense. Most were acquitted. The crowd turned on him for a while, whispers, insults, cold shoulders, but history remembers the moment differently. It was one of Adams' first great acts of courage, to defend the rule of law even when it was deeply unpopular. As the decade wore on, Adams became more and more entangled in the growing conflict with Britain. He joined the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, a gathering of fiery personalities, uncertain futures, and the smell of ink and candle wax filling the air. Adams wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but he was relentless. He believed independence wasn't just necessary, it was inevitable. When the time came to draft a declaration, Adams could have written it himself. But he stepped aside, encouraging a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson to take the lead. "You can write 10 times better than I can," he told Jefferson. And yet, behind the scenes, Adams was the driving force, debating, persuading, convincing hesitant delegates to sign what was essentially a death warrant. On July 2, 1776, when the Continental Congress voted for independence, Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail, "This day will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. It ought to be celebrated by succeeding generations, with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations." He was right, except for one small detail. The celebrations would happen 2 days later, on July 4th. Adams's partnership with Abigail was legendary, one of the great marriages in political history. Through hundreds of letters, we see their minds and hearts intertwined. She was not just a wife, but a confidant, an advisor, and often his moral compass. She urged him to "Remember the ladies" when crafting new laws, a sentiment far ahead of its time. Together, they weathered years of separation, political storms, and financial struggles. Adams would go on to serve as America's first vice president under George Washington. He called it the most insignificant office ever invented, but he served faithfully, waiting his turn. And in 1797, that turn finally came. John Adams became the second president of the United States. But the presidency was not kind to him. He inherited a divided nation, torn between supporters of France and those of Britain, between Federalists and Republicans. Adams, ever the man of principle, refused to bow to either side. When France threatened war, he strengthened the navy, but avoided conflict, negotiating peace through diplomacy instead of bloodshed. It was a deeply unpopular move. People wanted a show of strength, but Adams saved his young nation from a war it wasn't ready to fight. Still, his time in office was marked by controversy, especially the Alien and Sedition Acts, laws passed during national paranoia that limited free speech and targeted immigrants. History would judge those acts harshly, and Adams's reputation suffered. When he ran for re-election, he lost to none other than his old friend, Thomas Jefferson. On the morning of Jefferson's inauguration, Adams left Washington quietly, before dawn. No fanfare, no farewell, just a weary man returning home to Massachusetts, his work seemingly unappreciated. But history has a way of softening its judgments. In his retirement, Adams lived a long, contemplative life. He and Jefferson, once rivals, rekindled their friendship through a series of letters, brilliant, warm, and philosophical. They wrote about politics, faith, and old age, about the experiment they had started together, the republic they had built. And then, on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence, John Adams lay on his deathbed. His last words were said to have been, "Thomas Jefferson survives." But he was wrong. Jefferson had just died just hours earlier that same day. Two old revolutionaries leaving this world on the anniversary of their greatest creation, the United States of America. John Adams was many things: brilliant, stubborn, moral, flawed. He could be vain, difficult, and sometimes inflexible. But above all, he was honest. He once wrote, "Liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge among the people." He believed in education, law, and reason, pillars of a democracy that would outlive him. So when we remember John Adams, we shouldn't just see the man who followed Washington or lost to Jefferson. We should see the man who defended justice when it was dangerous, who helped spark a revolution of ideas, and who lived long enough to see those ideas take root. Because John Adams didn't chase history, he built it, one stubborn, principled step at a time. This was the reluctant revolutionary, John Adams. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more tales of the people who shaped the world, not just through power, but through principle. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and never stop thinking about how one voice can change a nation.